about Ofte and Al-Jazeera. And we had a quarrel. And then I said that why, but I also want to tell you that there is a possibility that the United States will change its leader and that the next leader will be a man called Obama. Then he shined and he turned around to me, gave me his hand and he said, if you elect Obama, we will kill Bin Laden.
My name is Halvor from Norwegian newspaper Ofte. You talked about the difference in integration between America and Europe regarding the Muslim minority. And you point out that in America the Muslims are much better integrated and much more part of society. And also you don't have these homegrown terrorism in the United States. The 9/11 people came from abroad and made these attacks in the United States. They were not born there. Do you have any thoughts what we could do in Europe to be more successful in this regard? Do you actually say that in order to integrate the Muslims better, we have to apply to a bigger extent the American model, which means to abolish the welfare state? Is that your concept to do this, or do you have any thoughts about it? Great.
Okay, that's right. Look, those are all great questions, and I start with the idea of helping them economically. Unfortunately, my country helps the Saudi and all the oil suppliers economically really well right now. The problem is getting that money to ordinary Saudis. Now, there's a structural problem. I don't know, it must be 90% of the Saudi gross national product comes out of oil. But the whole industry only employs about 20,000 people. It's a very low labor intensive in Saudi Arabia. It's not like here where you have to go off the coast and work really hard. You stick a pipe in the ground and it spews out. It's very easy to get the oil out of Saudi Arabia, and it doesn't take much labor. And much of the labor that is used is foreign. If you go to Saudi Arabia, you're immediately struck by the fact that there are about as many foreigners as there are Saudis, and that the foreigners do much of the labor. There's a cultural prejudice inside Saudi Arabia about certain jobs that they won't accept, and then also the Saudis themselves are poorly trained, as you must have seen again and again. And since you worked in women's universities, this is a huge loss for Saudi Arabia. I think the greatest untapped of highly skilled labor in the world must be Saudi women. There's, at every level of education, high school, college, postgraduate, women are better educated, more highly educated than the men. And yet, only, according to the Saudi figures, only about 5% of women actually have jobs. There's a great deal of resistance culturally to letting women work. But there they all, ready to go. And then they have no place to go. What a terrible tragedy for the country and for the women themselves. So I do think that encouraging, pressing, not just Saudi Arabia, but many Muslim countries that pose these kind of barriers to progress for women and don't allow young people to incorporate it into the economy. That's a very important step, and yet it's a very sensitive matter. And we have a lot of class disparity in my own country. So still, it's essential for people to sense that they have the ability to move through society. I think one of the problems with Bin Laden, he had all the money he needed, but when he came back to Saudi Arabia, he was a very unusual figure in Saudi Arabia. He was rich, he was famous, he was, I describe him as Saudi Arabia's first celebrity. But he wasn't royal. So he couldn't take the next step in his own society. He was blocked. And if you remove some of those barriers to progress, then I think you're naturally going to have a lower degree of radicalism. On the election, back this past March, I was in Cairo, and I went over to make a talk at Cairo University. 200,000 students, by the way, and it's emblematic of the kinds of problems that society has. These huge, dilapidated buildings and overcrowded classrooms. But I made a chat with this political science class, and one of the women in the class asked me who I was going to vote for. And I said, well, in the U.S., reporters have a conceit that we don't tell. We're above all that, and we don't share our private views. It'd be embarrassing. But I'm interested in the fact that all of you are following the election so closely. So if you were able to vote in the American election, this is back in March, how many here would vote for John McCain? One hand from a professor who secretly worked for state security. How many would vote for Hillary? 5 girls in hijab. How many would vote for Obama? All the other hands. There's no doubt that the message that Obama puts out about hope resonates far beyond the borders of America. That many people all over the world resonate to this idea that things can change, that individuals can make a difference. I feel that the reason that there's no Al-Qaida presence in America is the same reason that Barack Obama can be elected president. The one thing that I think in the 20th century, the greatest thing that America did was the Civil Rights Revolution. As a young reporter, I covered the end of the Civil Rights movement. And when I was a young man, when I was a boy and growing up in Texas, you defined America as white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. That's the way I saw it. And then through the courage and sacrifice of so many other kinds of Americans, we gradually, reluctantly changed the image we had of ourselves so that we defined America as a nation of diversity. I want you to understand, we didn't do that when I was young. Now that's the case. And so that if you are walking down the street in New York, or you see a group of children playing together and they're all one color or one ethnic group, that doesn't seem American anymore. Now, that change has allowed a half-black, formerly Muslim, grown up in Indonesia and Hawaii, individual to rise to the top of the American political system. I think it's going to be a long time before that kind of thing happens in Europe, and there are reasons for it. One is when I talked about in Belgium, European identities tend to be more fragile, more easily destroyed. When you have a country of 4 or 5 million people, that's not a lot of people. It's less than the size of some